Welcome to Christian Men Unscripted. My name is Seth Lazan. What?
Voice is awful.
He's got his DJ voice going.
What do you mean? It was kind
Welcome to Christian Men Unscripted.
That's better.
That was sultry,
Sorry,
bro.
I don't have.
That's what it was.
It was sultry.
I don't have bass in my voice.
No,
I know, man.
Yeah,
I'm just messing
I
with you.
mean,
Finish
like-
what you were saying.
All right. Welcome to Christian Men Unscripted. My name is Seth Lazan. It's just unnatural. It's
Yeah.
unnatural.
Yeah.
All right, my name is Seth Lazan, and I'm with Alan Underwood, John Harney, and our friend and guest today, Joni.
That's why we never let him do this.
Because every time that's what I do. I just mess. All right, Joey Cunha.
Joey C. Dude, this
Joey
is
Joey
Joey
C.
C.
Okay.
Okay, is that okay? Do I call
Yeah,
you Joey C?
you're good. Yeah.
All right, listen. Here's what's going on. First of all, apologies to our listeners
Yes.
that Seth didn't stay in his sultry voice. He thought I was going to say apologies for him messing up.
That the
I'm saying
name.
Okay.
apologies for you
I
not
appreciate
staying in that sultry. I felt drawn in for a moment until Alan
Yeah.
made fun of you.
Well, yeah, that's what
you
I
know?
do.
So I'm going to need to
That's right.
apologize again to Alan. I thought it was going good. I was
Yeah.
like, this is cool because we got Joey
I
Cunha
can't help it. It
on.
made me laugh.
This is what I go to counseling for. Alan.
You're in ministry and all these things, and now you're seeing a counselor, and they're like, maybe you shouldn't do that podcast.
Yeah, that's
maybe
probably-
maybe
what it
that's
is,
the
I
issue.
think. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so I've got to introduce Joey Cunha, how this came about. So as everyone knows, this is an unscripted podcast, and as now, of course, Joey C., you can point that out as well. We show up, we're like, what are we going to talk about, right?
Yeah,
Here's
love
where
it.
we are. But I'm in this conversation with a friend. I won't say his last name until he gives me full permission because I want him to come on the show. But he's a friend of mine. He's a pastor, a local pastor. I'm going to say his first name, Skyler. He's a good dude. He's awesome, right? Believer in Jesus. He's all about ministry. I'm in a conversation with him at the gym almost every day because I go to the gym to talk, not to work out, if I'm being full transparency.
It looks like it looks that way.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate you guys. It's true though, you know, I'm going after a dad bod now, bro. I used to be all shredded back in the day. We've talked about that when we were working strip bikes as cops.
I got a photo. We'll put it up
Shredded, dude, beautiful hair, tan calves,
You
dude,
say
flexing my
that?
calves.
Wait, so you said strip bikes? So were you strippers on bikes?
See, dude,
We could've
Las
been. We
Vegas
could've been.
Boulevard, the strip. We used to ride bicycles. We were all shredded, dude, and flexing. You know, you'd be grabbing stuff. Anyway, okay, listen. The point is this, dude. The point is this.
And the pictures were flexing.
For
I
sure.
got them on the wall. I should put them back here.
Dude, we're young
Someone's
guys.
got the camera out. You know?
Oh yeah,
You
for
gotta-
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, of course. You know, and by the
Tan,
way, that was
very tan.
that was before cell phones. We'd have so many funny videos and photos if we
Oh
had
my
these.
gosh.
I'd probably also be in jail if I'm being honest with you. But anyway, all right. So I'm at the gym talking as I do with one of my friends, Skyler. He's awesome, a believer in Jesus. We're talking about ministry and all these things, and I'd like him to come on to this show one of these times. You know, we'll get him on. But we end up in this conversation of like how it seems to be in ministry as in life, only maybe more because of the spiritual warfare that we have full calendars. We've kind of, Seth has corrected me on saying I'm busy in the past. It's a good way to say like because it's good stuff sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sort of talking and I'm like, yeah, man, where we been at in the podcast, and we're trying to be ministering, reference just being guys, being busy, and it applies to men, women, whatever. That here we are trying to share Christ, but yet we ourselves are constantly under attack. How do you kind of balance this? What is the podcast even about? We've been talking about that, trying to get this back into the lane that we originally wanted it to be in, which is, man, life is a struggle. It's not going to be perfectly easy, and believing in Jesus doesn't change everything either. In the fact that you're not going to still see hardships, it changes everything for your eternity and your decision making if you consistently balance your life to the Word of God. So we're sort of sharing that. That's kind of what the podcast is. Then we're saying, hey, I'm like, but I want you on, bro, because I want your background, right? Because he has this interesting background.
He does.
Interesting. Yes, he does. A bit interesting story.
Yeah. Great.
And I'm like,
testimony.
for sure. And then we get into the story of like, okay, we're also kind of talking about athletes finding their identity in what they do as an athlete. We had Rick Strasser on, awesome guest, talking about that with the
Overtime Ministries.
Thank you, Overtime Ministries. And he had this backstory. And I'm sort of just sharing this. And Skyler says, you have to meet my friend Joey C. He's like, dude, you got to have Joey C on. And full disclosure, I don't know if it's cool that I share this. Skyler just straight up shared your number with me. I was like, he's like, here's his number. Call him.
Call
I was
him,
like,
give him a call.
should you get-
By the way, he does that all the time. And I'm like, Scott, you just put me in some situations, man. You just been giving my number out.
So, yeah, I was like,
funny.
do you need to check with him? He was like, nope.
No, call him right now.
And he was like, he'll be on your podcast.
Yeah.
I'm sure a week later.
And a week later, it was great. I called you up. We had this great conversation. We ended up on the phone for 30, 35 minutes.
Yeah.
I shared with Seth before we went on the air. I still haven't got to know you. But that's how Joey C came about. So let's get into who is Joey C. Let's start there. Can I ask you who you are?
Yeah.
And besides the fact that Skylar says he has to be on, you're going to love this guy. He has to be on. Can we just start to talk about what kind of questions to start with? Who you are? Where does your faith even step into your work? What do you do?
Kind of like also start like where you grew up in Vegas.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Vegas, North Las Vegas, specifically like down the street from Cheyenne. You know, if you guys know the area.
Yep.
So grew up. I'm the youngest in my family. My oldest brother was a gang member. I kind of grew up through Vegas was really rough at the time, you know, and so especially in that area because as you go, if you guys know about Vegas and if you're listening from that lens, it was a school at the time that now there's like 4 other schools in that area, but at the time that was the only school in that area, and there's a lot of gangs all coming to the same school, and so it was a tough, just because of that, it was a tough. It was a tough time as like growing up through that, and like I grew up my whole life like not wearing red because my brother in the gang affiliations and all of these things, and so I got to see a lot of these diverse interactions. We're kind of talking about that today. It's just like how different things were like when I was growing up compared to now as well, right? Yep. But grew up playing sports, played a bunch of different sports. Lived in Vegas, didn't travel a ton when I was younger, and then when I did end up leaving to go play baseball in college, now for 10 years I left Vegas and was came home for summers and Christmas breaks, and that was it basically, and then jumped into the world of after baseball, got hurt, tore my shoulder in a couple places, and then I was doing an internship at the time with Planet Fitness. Right, and so I needed it for school. I was a sports management major, exercise science major, dual major, and then they offered me the GM job, and I had torn my shoulder, and I still had a year of eligibility. I might go back when I'm like 45, and just go back and do it one more time. But no, they offered me the GM job at the time, and I was in Hutchinson, Kansas, like middle of nowhere. And I'm like, I might as well get into this world, and so I jumped into that. Quickly became the regional manager of that area, then got promoted out to Austin, Texas, lived out there for about 9 months, moved to Utah because I actually took it part of my testimony, I'm sure we'll get back to that at some point, but God brought me back into coaching. And so I went into corporate America for a while, had all this checklist of all these things that I thought my life needed to look like. Yeah. And then, it wasn't. And so I quickly figured that out, got back into baseball, and that side, God doing his thing, started helping out. There was a local AAA team there at the time. They're still there, is Salt Lake Bees. And so that's for the Angels, like AAA team. The hitting coach, I got in contact with him through social media. Somebody connected us. I ended up shadowing him. It turned in, that kind of started building up some of that professional like experience. And that way I got picked up by a leading facility out in Southern California that wanted to hire me. So I went out there. I was the director of hitting, director of business development out there for 2 years, started consulting for a bunch of MLB teams. We trained, hundreds of athletes. It's like one of the more renowned facilities like in the nation. And then, from there, I was taking a job with the Cubs as their hitting coordinator, and then, prepared my position, at the facility there for about 4 months for my transition. And then right as I went to transition to go take that job with the Cubs, COVID hit that month. And then when COVID hit, they slowed everything down, and you're like, hey, it's going to be 2 weeks, and then everything's gonna go back to normal, and we'll consider on. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm about I haven't been home in 10 years and lived at home in 10 years, and I'm just like, okay, so I'm gonna go back home for 2 weeks, spend some time with my family because my whole family still lives here, and then I'm gonna go move to Chicago. So like 2 weeks turned into 6 months, and then I'm like, hey, I was living with my brother at the time, just. It was supposed to be 2 weeks. And so I ended up taking on his extra bedroom, and I'm like, okay, I need to get a place. So I ended up getting a spot. And then also, crazy story, but again, along with it, we had an investor that came on board that found me on social media. Again, part of testimony for sure. And then we ended up opening a facility out here in Vegas. And then, so when it comes into that, we've consulted for about half the MLB. In some way, in some fashion. We sell a whole bunch of training products, innovative creating things that with different manufacturers and things like that to kind of bring those things to light. And we train a bunch of athletes and do a bunch of stuff on that side. So
You said the word social media a few times.
Yes, quite a bit.
Because I failed to mention only because I know I did a very long introduction.
Yeah.
Part of this was a conversation I was having with my friend at the gym about our recent episodes on this podcast about social media as well. And so you sort of brought up work-life balance type of a conversation, like you're trying to work, you're part of this, but the social media aspect, we have all of these conversations about the damage that it causes in our homes and stuff. And so that was also part of the conversation I had with Skyler was, he's like, oh, and if you're talking social media, this guy knows he's kind of in that world as well quite a bit. And
It's
so,
a big part of our business.
right. So, I mean, my question goes back to like, how has that even been used? But I'd like to get into your faith stuff as well. But
Of course.
Oh, my question is Planet Fitness because I used to go there and
Yeah.
I used to laugh because I'd get bagels and then pizza when I walked out.
Yeah.
And then Tootsie Rolls. I'm like, what kind of gym is this?
Yeah. And
Really?
and no.
Yeah, I would go. I'm like, well, I'll have a piece of pizza after I'm done working out.
Yeah.
I burned it off.
that's good.
Yeah. No. You.
So that's when it came to my mind.
No. You. That's actually a big point because at the time when I did the internship with them, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like the opposite of like an athlete gym.
Yeah. They
Right.
are.
And this kind of is the origin story of I fell in love with their business model
Yeah,
and how
it's
brilliant the business model was.
Smart.
And so a big passion of mine is business. And so, again, that corporate world, again, God obviously knowing what he's doing, he used a lot of those experiences, right, to formulate now that what we do with a lot of things within our business. And, again, there's ideas and that experience that came from that. But like you would think, right, again, same thing, like
Yeah.
athlete wise, you walk into a Planet Fitness, like this is the opposite
I've
gym.
never heard that
No
before.
judgment zone.
Yeah.
It's great, but I never heard that.
I always
Yeah.
wondered about their colors. I'm like, why is this purple and yellow in here? It like kind of makes me tired. Makes me want to eat a piece of pizza when I leave. Anyway, I know we're off topic,
Yeah.
but that's what came to mind.
Yeah, for sure.
And then
Sure,
the
it's
social
great.
media, like I've always been on social media, but like
Yeah.
to do it for a podcast, to try and put reels out every day and trying to get traction. It's the hardest thing. I didn't think it'd be that hard. It's hard.
It's difficult.
and
yeah.
then to edit them and then put them out. And I've been doing
Yeah.
it for 2 weeks now. And I think we got like 3 people follow us.
Hey, good job. Good job. Good job.
Yeah, thanks. I'm learning.
I
man.
created
Yeah.
3 more accounts and followed us.
Oh,
We do
man.
have, we do have extra accounts because I couldn't remember the password, so I just started a new one.
Oh, listen. Part of that conversation that Skylar and I were having was Satan is using the world, that cosmos world system is using social media and dragging our kids, dragging people, by the way, adults and kids, from truth
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
into dark places, very dark places. And we can
Yeah.
get into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so
Well-
I feel like we should be jumping in that battleground as well.
Well, it's
with
funny.
Christ.
You're
Yeah.
right. As a Christian ministry, to get into the social media world, my son, I told you guys, quick story, side note, my son decided to go to LA for a concert last night on his own, 21. He's 21 in a week.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, who goes to a concert by themselves in LA and then comes back the same night?
Yeah.
And as a parent, I know he's 21. I know he's old
Yeah.
enough to do it, but I worry because he lives under my roof. If he was out and about, I wouldn't pay attention. I wouldn't worry.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. But now he's driving back from LA 3 a.m, so I'm worried. So I'm up. I'm just kind of scrolling through social media, and we have an X account, but I don't use it because I don't. It is the worst. I'm like scrolling. I'm like, there's nothing good on here.
I've never
People
seen
are
it.
so bad. But like my Instagram and our what's the other one we have? Instagram and TikTok. I don't see a whole lot of bad things. I guess it's an algorithm.
Yeah, I was going to say, I definitely have some things from that. So with that, again, there's some useful tools of navigating social media. So social media the algorithm is actually really interesting in how it works. It's actually it's really sophisticated, and it actually is like a mirror of what we interact with.
Right.
And so it for example, sometimes we send things to other people because we disagree. Right. And we're like, oh man, like, look at this. I can't believe this is being said, or they're doing this. Right. But the algorithm sees that as you interacted with it and you cared enough to send it.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a very big thing. Right. So you can start popping up a whole bunch of things that you
Yeah.
don't want to
What you
see.
don't wanna
Right.
see.
And also because specifically when you talked about like with X, not only is it an election year, not only is, there's a lot of things that are out there, but the other part with that too is people are sending around things that they disagree with. But
Right.
then, even, my feed, all of a sudden I start seeing all these things that like I disagree with.
Yeah.
And then, and I have to be very cautious of that. But one tool that I think a lot of people don't utilize on social media, like, a spiritual warfare thing, but also some practical application, is that there's usually specifically on different platforms, they do it in different ways. But you can like there's like 3 dots or things on a post, and you can tap on it, and it says you can say that you're not interested in this content. And so a lot of people, the reason that that's important is if you start reporting to the algorithm that I don't want to see things like this, really quickly your feed will change, right? Like, for example, like if you get on a lot of my social media feeds, my experience might be very different from somebody else's, right? Where I'm seeing a bunch of business stuff. I'm seeing a bunch of, pastors. I'm seeing a bunch of all these things, right? But like I was very intentional about, just like we should be out in the world, right? Very intentional about who we interact with, what we're consuming, what's going in, what our inputs are, and what books we're reading, the conversations we're having, all of those things. And so you can formulate your social media because, the enemy always kill, steal, and destroy, right? He always likes to take things, anything that's a very powerful tool. The church, for example, very powerful tool that Satan also tries to utilize that largely, right? And so it's super important in the same way with that is, like you said, is not to completely abandon, in my opinion, but learn how to navigate in those worlds, because it is part of a world and it's not going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere.
And also on the other side of that is learning that, again, in those spaces, obviously throughout the Bible constantly, where Jesus is being sent to these places that are war grounds, that are to these people, right? And not to just abandon and going like, oh, I'm just not going to be here, right? But to, again, also let our light shine in those areas, in those realms. And, for example, my social medias, for about a year, what I ended up doing, me and you started talking about this the other day, is for about a year I was doing Bible studies on my social media, which again were primarily people are following me for what? For baseball, right? Like they want to know about hitting, they want to know all these other things, right? And so we're very open out there with my faith, specifically me, more than like everybody else. I think the rest of the staff's like, what can we do? What can we not do? But me, I'm like, I'm just out there doing my thing. So, but yeah, I was doing lives on Instagram for about a year, straight every Thursday. At 6:30, we would do a Bible study and whatever God would kind of put on my heart, and we would what scripture He was pulling me through, and like what I felt like, what I was seeing on social media, and like and then reflecting back out that way as well. So yeah, it could be a very useful tool. It could be used to just like the rest of the world, right? You get a platform, you can use it to push hate, you can use it to push obviously anything other than Jesus, right? Or you can also use it to reflect your inner world and share your experience as well, and it's a great platform in that way too. So
no, I agree. Yesterday I must have sent out. Did I send it to you? I don't know if I sent it to Jerry, but they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs, and then all the animals are like, what? I sent out 20 of those yesterday because it's hilarious.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And
for sure.
All the pets are like,
what?
People have dogs on their grill.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
I loved it. I was like, this is great. I'm sending this to everybody.
So
Yeah,
funny,
it's
dude.
Yeah.
It's funny right now. Seth has not jumped in a lot yet, and you're going to, because once you guys start talking baseball stuff, you two, we'll get you guys into. Seth has also been a hitting coach and all those things. But we got a little bit of your background.
Yep.
The professional side of things, the Planet Fitness pizza handout job and stuff like
Tootsie
that.
Rolls.
And Tootsie Rolls. No, I think it's great. I'm sure that's a great place for
I
people.
went there for a couple of years because
good.
there's never crowded.
Well,
Yeah,
that's good.
That's what I liked about it.
Yeah.
Look, as long as people, we've talked about that, get spiritually fit, get physically fit, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
All these things matter. But intentional faith, you use the word intentional, you talked about your faith. Can we go back on, when did you become a believer in Jesus? What is your faith background?
Yeah.
And if we can kind of carry that into baseball, then that all of a sudden opens up the door for Seth
Wait,
to tell you how
say
to be
something real quick, Seth.
I'm here.
Make sure Seth will ask him to give you pointers on how to be a better hitting coach. Also, we'll get into a thing. Faith,
Agreed.
intentional
Yeah.
faith. What's your faith background?
Yeah, I was. I like to say that I was born Catholic, raised Christian, and the reason I would say with that is when I was first born, my grandmother is like the foundation of the faith for my entire family. And so when I was, she was, has always been huge in her faith. She was like, when I was born, the family was Catholic. Mm-hmm. And then as you were raised, I went to non-denominational. And basically as, with that, I remember we would, as a family, we would show up halfway through worship because, that was the preview to what we were really there for. And the worship wasn't
Mm-hmm.
So I was like,
Side note real quick. When I'm at church and people do that and they come in with Starbucks halfway through, I'm like,
Well,
Get here on time.
Seth is in ministry. Do you have people at your church? I have people every Sunday
Oh yeah.
at my church that show up, and I know that they're timing it so that they're past the announcements, past them.
Yeah, I might
Our
do that
church
at
is
your
old.
church.
Our church is old enough to they're like we're there 20 minutes early. That's
They'd
what
be
my
there,
church
yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and that's
Sorry.
the thing. Yeah, and yeah. So that was
It's true though.
like, early on, I would say that, again, like I think it's a root of us understanding that, you can't have a relationship with God through somebody else. Right. And that's kind of how our family was rooted at the time. Right. It's like we didn't have a deep relationship in that way as a family. And then so as I actually got into high school, I was always really into science, just like I am now. I was really into science. God, really had these things on my heart, and like I had a passion for technology and like all these other things, right? But with that as well, it led me down a route where I was like, again, I can debunk all of this. I apologize for all the things I'm about to say, but it's like, you can't believe the science behind why that light works, but not believe how they say like how the world started or this or X, Y, and Z, right? And so I can poke holes in all of these things that I thought at the time, right? All these lies and things that the enemy was just in my ear, and then also too the the school system, all the things that are being pushed, or religion being pushed out of school, right? Church and state getting separate, and all of those things. And so with that, within high school, I became atheist. And like when I say atheist, like I was going out there, trying to disprove and push people away from God. So I really connect with Paul in the Bible, a ton, right? Because of this, and that being my path. Like it was like I was a warrior, and I'm
You were that adamant.
I'm really good at debating, right?
Right.
And but again, for who, right? And just like Paul in that same way, right? Is when he was in that Saul life, I know what that was like, right? And so at the time, my dad was some really tough things. I grew up. My family was there was a lot of abuse in my family, physical, emotional, spiritually. There was a lot of things that were going on, and they're humans like anybody else, and we lacked a relationship with God, and and a personal relationship that was other than just like don't do this, don't do that, and actually the relationship piece, how important that was. And so I think again, along with that is that atheist route was a really important piece where for years, then I'm like, okay, for school, like in baseball, right, I'm chasing after my own things, but like God loved me too much, right, and pulled me in, is I actually ended up going, and at one point ended up transferring to a Christian college, not because I wanted to go to a Christian college, but because I was trying to play baseball.
Yeah.
And so they required us to go to chapel. They required us to take these classes. They required us to do these other things. So then I'm sitting in class, and I'm like, we're required to read through books in the Bible, and I'm looking Cliff Notes. I'm doing, I'm just like, all right, we got to do this, right? But so then I had this one, and this is where I think it's so important was, they have science classes at these schools, right? So you're like, okay, so how do you believe, in my head, how do you believe in science and also believe in God, right? They didn't intermix in my head. I that was a barrier for me.
Yep.
So I started having, it started with there's little bricks that God started dismantling some of these things and building like the foundation for me. And one of those was, again, like, man, these science teachers, like, were so on fire for God. And they're like, man, when you look into the complexity, and you look at like, like, again, like there has to be a designer, right? That, that all points to when you get into the depths of the complexity and how, like, if this was just a little this way, or if that was just a little this way, right? Or, if this, again, for example, if this animal didn't exist, like what that would do to an ecosystem, or what that would do, all these things, right? So it all points to, this designer, right? And we're also designing technology based off of like God's original creations. Like we're trying to, like, for example, like all these cameras, they're modeled after the human eye. Right. And so because this is so complex and this is such a brilliant design, is like we're trying to model everything off of what's already been created by God, and it's like, and we still can't do it, right? So it's like I not only that, but then I had a teacher. Okay, I started getting in, and I'm like, man, like there was things I disagreed with in the Bible that stepped on my toes, right? And of course, right, cut like a sword. Right. Yeah. And so, I would go in his office. I was respectful about it, but I would go in his office afterwards, right? And God, because I'm a debater, I want to debate. So I go in the office, and I'm like, hey, like, I get what you're teaching. I understand what the Bible's saying. This is what I have an issue with. Like, for example, I'm asking real questions. Like, so you're trying to tell me that if Hitler came to God, right, at the end of his life, and he said these things, but you're telling me that Gandhi's going to hell? Like, I'm struggling with these things.
We just talked about that last episode.
And so I was talking to him, and he was so good at filling my questions and not, when I was growing up, anytime I questioned anything about my faith, right, and I started asking these questions, my family would be like, don't ever question God. Don't ever question God. Don't ever do these other things, right? And then, he was more like, God's not afraid of your questions. And I was like, man, like that was such an unlock for me. And rather than just like, like shut your mouth and follow and just do this. And it's like, I couldn't be a blind follower. Like I needed to really, if I was going to lean on him, I needed to really trust him. And so that was like a big barrier for me that was built, definitely from my family in that way. And also too, right? Like I had the common questions, right? Like, if God's here, why are all these things happening in the world? If it, all these basic, things that really, are hurdles for people to get through. And then I would get to the point where I'm reading through things and I'm like, I'm going to our teacher. I'm like, okay, hey, look, I agree with, morally all these things that are said in the Bible. Like I agree with these things. The problem is like, I'm not ready to give it to Jesus, right? I'm not ready. Like I believe that they're, the universe, right? I believe all of those things, but I'm not ready to give it to Jesus, right? And then I had another instructor that tell me, like, don't worship the creation, worship the creator. And, it's like, like it's just like swords, like, cutting from these things. And it slowly backed that away. And then I just remember when I was working for Planet Fitness, I remember at one point, again, still had not given, my faith. I wasn't there. And I remember sitting in front of my director of ops at the time. She was really big in her faith. And I remember sitting across from her one day on like a trip that we were, traveling, all those things. And I'm like weeping in front of her. And I'm like, the scariest thing that like I can think of is sitting across from my creator. And like, and this is my life, and like, he just broke me to a point where I'm just, weeping, thinking about sitting in front of Jesus, and, but I still haven't given my life to him. Right. I was afraid of him. I was in fear, right. Which is the beginning of wisdom. Right. I was in fear. Right. And disappointment and shame and generational things that were latched onto me and chains that had been associated. And then it's so funny how God works is because then as I left corporate America, because in that, right, is I had all these things in my life that the lies of Satan, right? Like, and God blessed me in this way. Like I had this list, like once I have this, then I'll have peace, joy,
right.
The understanding, right? Self-control, all those things, right? That. Discipline, all the things,
then.
right?
If then,
right?
Yeah.
And so I achieved those things, right? I had the apartment, and I was living in Austin, Texas. And I had the Mustang. I had the all the list, right? The list of like what would make me important. I wore multi-$1,000 suits every day when I went to all these facilities. When I walked into the facility, like I was important. I was but meanwhile I was empty, and so. Because of that, and realizing, and I started to pray. I still haven't given my life to God, but I started to pray. God, like I know this can't be it. Like I know that this can't be it. Like I feel like I'm chasing my tail. I'm running in circles. For 6 months, right? I'm praying the same prayer. Like God, I know this can't be it. Like what's next for me? What's next for me? What's next for me? But I'm starting to go back to church, right? I still haven't given my life to Him. I'm just going to church, and then we went to a service. Literally wasn't even a message service. It was about how they were in between series, and they were talking about how we can serve the church and just things that the church needed, right? And how we all have different gifts and how we can use those gifts to serve the rest of the church, right? And so I go home, and I'm me being the great narcissist, right? I go home and I go, well, what gifts did God give me? And I'm scrolling through my social media and my Facebook, right? Social media, see, it's used for, God used it. I'm scrolling through and I come across a video of Lou Holtz, and he's talking about coaching. He's talking about how God blessed him to be a coach and gifted him with all these skills that come like with being a coach. And I'd been coaching since I was 15. I was on club ball teams and all these things. I had always been coaching. And I'm like, this was a gift. Like I need to coach. And so a year prior to that, had a coach that reached out to me that owned an academy out here, and he took a job out in Utah, and he's like, hey, come be my assistant coach. And I'm like, dude, I'm about to be a director. I'm about to get promoted to director over here, right? Like, right. I'm, living, my whole family is blue collar. I went the white collar route, went to college, first one in my family to go to college, all these other things, right? All these achievements, chasing after all these things. And I was like, I'm like, there's no way. Like high school baseball coaches make nothing. Assistant high school baseball coaches make absolutely nothing. And so like, I'm not going to move across the country and take this assistant high school coaching job. Right. So, a year later, I remember I've been praying for 6 months. What's next for me? What's next for me? My prayer that night changed to, what can I do for you? And it was like,
Yeah.
Boom. Everything like download, just like, what can I do for you? And it's like, you need a coach. So literally that was Sunday. Monday, I figured out a way to break my lease. Called that guy. I was like, hey, remember that job I said I'm not taking? Like, I'm taking that job. I'm moving across the country. I had no money put away because I've been blowing all my cash, right? Figured out a way, all these other things, like God made, because I literally didn't even have money to move. And so even though I was making plenty of money, it was just I was blowing everything, right? And so I moved across the country, went literally back to the bottom of the totem pole, right, of being an assistant high school baseball coach. And then when I moved there, it's so funny. It's like in Utah, which you wouldn't expect, right? In Utah is where I gave my life to Christ. Got baptized, went to a fantastic small church that was a branch off of a church out in Arizona that they went specifically because it was Utah. And they wanted to spread the good news over there. And so they went there, and to survive as a Christian church in Utah is very difficult. So they were really good. They were really good. It was amazing. They got a hold of my heart, and I finally surrendered my life there. And now, like I said, I was going into 8th year, of giving my life over to God. Yeah. And so, again, along with that, that journey is, this, and not only the sanctification process, but the relationship is more important to me than anything. I always say, if I can give something, if I can give one thing to anybody else, would be my relationship with God, and how, there's not money, there's not like just my relationship with God, how important that is. And, I can tell you from that point forward how, obviously, going through some of the accolades and the things that I've achieved, is literally abandoning. I had idolized as I was growing up that I wanted to be a CEO, that I wanted to be all these other things, right? And it's so funny because I surrendered that, and then he made me a CEO. It was like, it wasn't even something I was in chase of. I literally fought against it the whole way of like, I don't even want to do that. I don't. And then all of a sudden, now in that position, but it's funny because now that title or that thing, it doesn't hold, I don't idolize it. You can, I always say to people, to this business meeting, you talked about this the other day, I'm like, this, I was like, if God told me to close the door today and walk away from this business, like, I have no problem. Like, I'll close this thing and I'll be out of here. Right. Cause even though I put all these things into it, like, this is my worship, this is something I'm doing for God. It's not, the business itself doesn't really mean, like, it's important, but it's important to me because of what it's attached to, right? It's attached to God. It's not because it's important to me because of, it makes me feel secure or all these other things. All my security and all that comes from my relationship with God. So, again, that deeper trust and faith in that way. And I feel like it's his business and I'm just managing it. So I think that's a big piece for me, and like testimony wise, and like, he's blessed me, I can go on and on and on about all the things he's done. Right. But I testimony wise is like, he took me from being an atheist and brought me through. And that's what I said, I connect with Paul. And then also too, it gives me a voice to talk to atheists. And, a big book for me, if I can drop this as well, is, C.S. Lewis, when Mere Christianity, right. Excellent. Where he unpacks, right. He goes just like an atheist would think, and he goes with these one thoughts, and he dismantles, one by one of like what his, what happened to him. Right. And so, that was a massive book for me that really, helped me with my faith and like, led me to God. So, yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for joining us for part 1 with Joey Cunha. Join us next week, Tuesday, when we have part 2.
Eric